Okay, so in regards to color, my infographic almost exclusively uses green and various shades of gray. So I tried to emulate the various aspects of my color model. So in terms of using color to highlight, while not always true, my infographic does tend to use dark green to highlight certain graphical parts of a display and occasionally emphasize an identity label or precision label. This is slightly similar to my color model, which uses light and dark green in conjunction with bold text to highlight specific words and annotations or emphasize labels. In terms of encoding, my infographic uses color to encode a variety of things, including the identity of a specific group of data in a display's dataset, the magnitude of data values in a display, and the identity of specific objects in a display. This is quite similar to my color model, which also uses color to encode the particular category of data in a display and the magnitude of data in a display. In terms of triggering associations, the heavy use of green is used to create an association with the environment both in my infographic as well as in my color model. Now, in terms of setting a tone, the overall use of light green as a background color in my infographic creates a generally awake tone that is upbeat but also fairly soothing. Now, this is also done in my color model, but the additional use of dark green as a background color and the alternating between two background colors creates an even more upbeat tone whose slightly chaotic nature makes it less soothing. In terms of color harmony, the color harmony of my infographic is generally monochromatic, as again it uses mostly green with various shades of gray, but its occasional use of yellow, blue, and red could technically classify it as a square color harmony. In terms of text, all texts in my infographic are Century Gothic font face. All headings are all caps and bolded. Regular text is in sentence casing and not bolded, and subheadings vary from using the heading style of bolded with all caps to using the regular text style of bolded with sentence casing. Now, I also had a text model that I tried to emulate the various aspects of. In terms of using text to label, text in my typography model uses a condensed all-cap font to label identity and a combination of bolded and unbolded numbers for precision. My infographic also uses text to label identity and precision, but uses uncondensed sentence-cased fonts for labeling, a decision made for the sake of readability, and focuses mostly on unbolded numbers for precision labeling, but still uses a bold number in one case. In terms of annotations, my typography model is full of blocks of sentence-cased annotations, and while my infographic isn't quite as loaded with annotations, it still has some large sentence-cased annotation blocks that emulate my model well. In terms of associating labels, my typography model uses proximity, leader lines, and color to associate its labels. It uses mainly proximity for identity labels, color for precision labels, and leader lines for when both precision and identity labels are present. In my infographic, almost all my labels use proximity to associate, usually in conjunction with color for precision labels. Some of my identity labels are associated with leader lines instead of proximity, but don't use the identity and precision combination seen in the typography model. Taking a look at the visual hierarchy present in my infographic, similar to my color model, my infographic has a strong visual focus on graphics over text. My visual hierarchy starts with the three main displays in the upper middle portion. The next most prominent thing is the large title at the top of the page, followed by the three displays in the lower portion of the infographic. In my attempt to create a flow that leads the viewer, I used a combination of visual hierarchy as well as layout. The prominence of the infographics in the upper three displays immediately catch the user's attention and pull them in, quickly leading them to read the nearby and semi-prominent title of one of the displays when they're curious what their chosen display is about. When they go to scan the infographic again, they'll already be looking at the upper portion of the infographic and likely see the next most prominent piece after the three upper displays, which is the main title, Sustainable Living, which will give them some context, especially if they read the adjacent subheading, A Modern Approach to Energy Conservation. After that, since they're already at the top of the page, they'll likely start scanning down towards the bottom, hitting anything prominent along the way. This works perfectly as I have laid my displays out in a line from top to bottom until they reach the bottom of the infographic where things become a bit more text-heavy and less prominent. At this point, if they're still interested, then they're likely fairly invested already and will be okay switching to the left to right, top to bottom flow in my bottom section, possibly reading the annotation text, possibly skipping it. After that, I was hoping to snag their attention one last time before they leave, having them read the takeaway just after the last section and before the sources, but I fear that even though I used large text, since there's a lot going on in the area, it may not be quite prominent enough to grab them. I probably should have added a larger buffer above and below the takeaway and possibly bolded the text. While the base model I emulated didn't seem to have a very prominent takeaway, it was also in a less chaotic environment, so I think it stood out more. Unfortunately, I also failed to realize that the base model bolded their takeaway text, which would have helped my takeaway as well. Looking at unity and variety, there's definitely a good amount of unity when it comes to color, as light and dark green and light and dark gray are used consistently throughout my infographic. I'm also consistent with my focus on fills for most of my infographic, but my bottom three displays break this consistency, since when I changed my base model to one that had more detailed displays, I also shifted the focus from exclusively fills to a style more focused on thickly stroked borders. In hindsight, I should have kept my style consistent, and seeing how well using only fills worked for the upper displays, I probably should have removed the border strokes from my lower displays. I'm not sure how well that would work for my time display, seeing as one of the lines dips behind the others, meaning I would likely have to use transparency in conjunction with changing the color coordination so that the underlying section pops out enough to still be visible. In my location display, I also used distinct color stops instead of a full gradient spectrum. This allowed for a better unity amongst the color palette, as well as creating additional rectangles, which were actually used quite a bit, both prominently in displays as bars and labels, as well as a bit more subtly as additions to the section headers. In the appearance and relationships displays, the same shapes and colors were used, tying them together by more than just proximity. There's also some good unity in the overarching typography as well, as all the titles are bolded in all caps. Each section is titled and separated in the same way, while the first two sections are laid out very similarly with the same prominence and background color. The third section changes it up a bit by using a second darker background color in the titles and annotations of its displays. Looking at my base model, the background color is consistent throughout the infographic, with deviations in the footer that uses a completely different background color, the grid section where each cell has an intermediate background color, and in another section containing two rows with completely different background colors. My infographic deviates similarly with a different background color in the footer and intermediate background colors in the grid section, except that it also has a different background color in the main title section, and the grid section is divided into rows instead of grids. I did a good job avoiding gradients, as only discrete colors were used in my base model. I also did a good job of creating an object in an appearance display and then reusing it somewhere else with minimal modifications, which was also done in my base model. I also used the same style of section headers as my base model, where the smaller title text was used in conjunction with a solid rectangular separator to divide sections. In my infographic, however, I chose to center these section headers, as I thought it gave a better look and feel. My variants in typography did deviate a bit from my base model, as my base model used quite a few different text styles for headings, while all my headings were the same font, all caps, and bolded, only occasionally varying in color and size. Taking a look at layout, I have a title section, 3 main content sections, and then a footer section with a list of sources. The title and footer sections have distinct background colors they use to group their elements and separate themselves from the rest of the infographic. The 3 main content sections share the same background color, stating that they are semantically grouped as content, but are separated by section headers with title text and super thick dark lines. The elements in the second section are grouped by proximity and separated by different titles. The elements in the third section are also grouped by proximity and separated by different titles, but are also partially separated by darker backgrounds and a small buffer between text blocks. The lower sections were an attempt to emulate the grid of displays used in my layout model, but I deviated quite a bit since one of my displays took up a whole row and the other two shared a row. The annotation text in this section also matched the color of the title text, which was another deviation from my layout model. Other than that, though, my displays used an interior background color that was the same as the main infographics background color, with a darker intermediary background color that was specifically for the title and annotation text. In addition, the display grid section was the only section where transparency, bold arrows, and lead lines were used, which emulates the layout model well, with the exception of the layout model's title block. Lastly, taking a look at alignment, the elements in my infographic were generally aligned to the very center of the page. I tried to center align the elements in the display grid I had in my third section, but had mixed success. My appearance display in the first row had 2 big houses to display with 2 suns at various distances. I loosely top-aligned the suns, which made it difficult to align the houses properly. Due to the sun in my relationship display, I wasn't able to properly center align the house to be in the middle of the cell either. My time display, however, was able to be center aligned after fiddling with the label positions. I also top-left aligned the annotations in my grid section and center aligned the titles in that section. In contrast, my layout model organizes most of its content into 3 center-aligned columns. I didn't have the same high quantity of displays as my model, so I wasn't able to emulate that. My grid section deviated quite a bit from my layout model as well, as my titles and annotations were both aligned differently, and while I wasn't very successful in my attempt to center align the content in each cell of the display grid, my layout model was quite successful at that.